In Argentina, more than 34 million citizens go to the polls to elect 151 new legislators in an essential election for the country. We have more details in this news brief. In Bolivia, violent groups belonging to the Cruceñista Youth Union have attacked a popular neighborhood in Santa Cruz and ratified the calls for a strike and protests. And Bulgarians are heading to the polls to elect a new parliament and a new president amid a surge of coronavirus infections. From the headquarters of Telesur English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm your anchor, Gladys Quesada. Now we begin with the news. On Sunday, in Argentina, more than 34 million citizens go to the polls to elect 151 new legislators in an essential election for the country, which is on the road to recovery after being severely punished by the pandemic. Following an intense campaign and 2 very complex months, especially after the primaries in which the ruling party suffered a hard setback, voters will decide today how both houses of Congress will look like when the renewal of half of the deputies and 1/3 of the Senate will take place. With a large deployment of more than 90,000 troops, the country will control general and health security, mainly in the province of Buenos Aires, which has the largest number of voters. For the administration of President Alberto Fernandez, this could be a defining election, since the majority of the husks so far in the upper house is at stake. More than 400,000 Argentines have been voting abroad for hours now. Let's go now with our correspondent, Sabrina Roth, who is on site to learn more details of these legislative elections as they unfold.
Greetings to you and Telesur's audience. We are in the Republic of Argentina, where a new election day is taking place all over the country. More than 34 million people are eligible to vote, and more than 100,000 polling stations have been set in 17,000 establishments throughout the nation. The elections began with absolute normalcy at 8 o'clock in the morning, with small delays in some of the voting stations, but without any inconvenience whatsoever. Of course, the COVID-19 protocols is still in force, although with some flexibility compared to what happened in the primary elections, especially relating to long waits in line, which for these elections were set up inside the polling stations. It is also mandatory to use face masks when casting the ballot. It is recommended that each voter carry his or her own pencil, and of course, to keep the required 2-meter distance. As we were saying, the elections are taking place in complete normalcy, in which Argentina are going to elect 127 deputies, half of the Chamber of Deputies and 1/3 of the Chamber of Senators in 8 provinces of the country are being renewed. Different leaders and politicians began to vote early in the morning. Among the first one to vote in the city of La Plata was Máximo Kirchner. In a press statement, he affirmed that all the measures adopted by the national government were not to overturn the results of the primary elections, but the result of the previous administrations and the effects of the pandemic. After 9:30 in the morning, President Alberto Fernandez casted his vote and celebrated the election day, calling all Argentines to exercise their right to vote. The executive said that starting tomorrow, he will continue working for the remaining 2 years of his party Front for All term in office. We will continue broadcasting and reporting for Telesur throughout the election day. We'll return with you to the studio.
Thank you, Sabrina, for this report. And now we move on, because now we are going to review the context in which Argentines arrived to these parliament elections.
These elections are crucial for the stability of the ruling party's governance for the next 2 years. After losing the majority in 18 out of 24 districts in September's primaries, including the autonomous cities of Buenos Aires, President Alberto Fernandez's coalition Front for All must strive to win the general legislative elections of November 14. The path to the elections has been marked by three main issues: the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, the country's economic situation inherited from a previous administration, and the debts with the International Monetary Fund. During the Fernandez administration, the Argentinian economy encountered the aftermaths of a pandemic, which caused it to drop by 9.9% in 2020, completing 3 years of recession. Despite this, Fernandez administration has managed to halt COVID-19 contagions and fully vaccinate over 60% of the population. In regards to the IMF debt, President Fernandez had this to say as the electoral campaign period came to a close.
Now we have to resolve the debt that they have left us with the International Monetary Fund. Of course, we have to resolve it. But I tell you, I am not going to solve it in 5 minutes, because whoever solved this problem in 5 minutes has given the fund the reason for everything they are asking for. And I give the reason to you, not to the fund. So I will take as much time as I need to find the best agreement for the Argentine people.
Following the results of the primaries in September, several government figures presented their resignations. The Minister of Interior, Minister of Science and Technology, the Minister of Justice, the Minister of Territorial Development and Habitat, the Minister of Culture, all presented their resignation, sparking then a situation of political crisis in Buenos Aires. The entire cabinet of ministers offered their resignation to Governor Axel Kicillof, the Executive Director of the National Social Security Administration, and the Executive Director of the state's comprehensive medical care program for retirees and pensioners also offered their resignation. Argentinian social movements led by Movimiento Evita expressed their support to President Alberto Fernandez amid the internal crisis that broke out among the different sectors that make up the government coalition. They mobilized under the slogans Fuerza Alberto and for the unity of the Front for All. Over 101,000 polling stations are open for Argentinians to vote. The nation's foreign ministry said more than 385,000 Argentinian citizens abroad can exercise their right to vote in these elections. Polls open at 8 a.m. local time and will close at 6 p.m. local time. However, if any voter is inside a voting center or outside in line after the closing hour, he or she will be able to vote. Results are expected to be very close in these elections. The opposition, Together for Change Alliance, seeks to control the Chamber of Deputies and the Senate in the second half of President Alberto Fernandez's term of office.
And we'll be right back after this very short break, so don't go away. Welcome back. We continue this news brief in Bolivia because in spite of the agreements and the abrogation of Bill 1386 approved by President Luis Arce, violent groups belonging to the Cruceñista Youth Union, a violent opposition organization, have attacked a popular neighborhood in Santa Cruz and ratified the calls for a strike and protest. The incidents are reported in the area known as Plan 3000, a housing development made up mostly of Bolivians from the Altiplano. According to the complaint filed by members of the Movement Towards Socialism Party, a group of dozens of people identified as part of the opposition Santa Cruz Youth Union attacked neighborhoods, leaving several injured in an atmosphere of violence and racism. Hours before, local residents had publicly expressed their opposition to the decision to sustain the strike called by the Santa Cruz Civic Committee despite the abrogation of Bill 1386.
We categorically reject the attitude of Rómulo Calvo, another one that becomes an enemy of the people of Santa Cruz, because he hires the Palomillos, he hires the Maleantos, to edit what is a criminal civic strike that at this moment is massacring the people of Santa Cruz. For that reason, we reject categorically his action. The population is in a state of emergency. We reject what is a criminal civic strike.
And now we move on to Peru. The government of President Pedro Castillo had set itself the goal of obtaining concrete results in the dialogue between employers and workers after a layoff imposed by the COVID-19 pandemic. In order to accomplish this, the government has reactivated the National Employment Promotion Council. To this end, the president held an event at the government house where he urged the sides of this social labor dialogue to maintain the will to bring welfare to all Peruvians. The president asked businessmen not to echo the campaign of lies against them and to invest in the country, thus generating jobs and the conditions necessary for the legalization of investments. In the middle of the critical moment experienced at Ecuador's prisons, inmates of 2 prisons started a hunger strike due to the extreme insecurity they live in and in solidarity with those who died this Friday in the prison Guayaquil after a deadly riot that left 68 dead and several injured. Prisoners from the detention center in Azuay and Cotopaxi provinces made the decision, which was later confirmed by the National Service for the Comprehensive Care of Adults who are deprived of liberty and of adolescent offenders of Ecuador, who reported that a group of people refused to eat food in protest. From inside the correctional facility, several inmates sent messages through social media networks, requesting help from the authorities, as well as videos and images that show the complex scenario experienced and even some of the murders. In Honduras, Francisco Gaitan, the mayor of the municipality of Cantarranas, was killed this Saturday during a rally. Preliminary information indicates that a man shot the politician who was running for re-election for the upcoming November 28th general elections. According to a preliminary police report, also, Gaitan was on a political campaign in San Luis when he was shot by a drunk man. He was later arrested by sympathizers of the Liberal Party and handed over to police agents. The death of Francisco Gaitan occurred when he was in the middle of the campaign for the elections to be held in 2 weeks, with the participation of 14 other political parties. Hundreds of citizens from Cantarranas took to the streets to protest the crime and to demand justice. The presumed murderer, named Wilfredo Velázquez, is in custody of the police, who are carrying out the pertinent investigations. And today in Havana, the capital of Cuba, the initiative of hundreds of young people who oppose the practices of unconventional warfare promoted by the United States government against the islands comes to an end. The movement, known as the Red Handkerchief, declared themselves defenders of life, equality, and sovereignty. The media does not talk much about those. They do not mention their peaceful sit-downs, much less their demands or the way in which they are affected by the sanctions imposed by Washington. Since last Friday, they have peacefully taken Havana's Central Park to demonstrate their rejection to the blockade, which they consider a violation of their human rights. These young people support the emancipatory struggles and the commitment with a perfectible socialism. The group also includes students, workers, housewives, and members of the LGBTQI community, who through a number of acts demand their right to a life in peace.
And we came out to the streets because today we have something sacred to defend, which is the quiet and the happiness that we are living right now in this country. As you can see, we're going to be here for 48 hours in a tent because we believe that the sacrifice is worth it. That is, the sacrifice to defend the moment we are living is worth it. A moment of peace, a moment where everything will reopen, where there will be normality and we are ready to go out.
Now we move on to other topics and give you good news from Cuba. This Saturday, for the first time in 7 months, the island experienced a day without deaths caused by COVID-19, a very favorable scenario for the opening starting on Monday 15th. The country has already gone through a new and a harsh outbreak with the arrival of the Delta variant. In the midst of the intensification of the illegitimate sanctions applied by Washington against the island, they have been able to recover after an intense battle against the disease, which included a vaccination campaign with vaccines entirely produced in Cuba. Yesterday, Cuba reported only 293 new positive cases. In the words of the Vice Minister of Health, represents a decrease of 19.1% less than the previous day. President Miguel Díaz-Canel Bermúdez, after recognizing that they have managed to control the pandemic, recalled that the challenge is to maintain that control hours before the country opens borders and children and adolescents return to schools. In Syria, the Ministry of Health received this Sunday a batch of 500,000 doses of COVID-19 vaccines donated by People's Republic of China. The Minister of Health, Hassan Al-Gubash, informed that the batch is part of the continuation of vaccines sent by the Chinese government that seeks to support the Arab country in the plan of immunization against the new coronavirus. The official also stressed that to date, only 5% of the population has been vaccinated in the country. At the same time, the Chinese ambassador in Damascus pointed out that the total amount of vaccines delivered to Syria amounts to 800,000 doses. It should be noted that the country is facing the pandemic with strong coercive and unilateral measures from the United States and the European Union, which hinders the purchase of vaccines. And we have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back. Bulgarians are heading to the polls to elect a new parliament and a new president amid the surge of coronavirus infections. Some 6.7 million eligible voters hope that after inconclusive general elections in April and July, the third attempt to elect 240 lawmakers will result in a government to lead the European Union's poorest member out of the health and economic crisis. Analysts predict a low turnout on Sunday due to the people's concern over the spread of the coronavirus, slow-moving vaccine uptake, and the political apathy after two inconclusive elections. A low turnout will favor the former ruling Third Party, which, despite a further erosion in support, can still count on many loyal voters and is likeliest to finish first. The general elections in Bulgaria also had expatriates voting from abroad in the parliamentary and presidential elections in their country this Sunday, November 14th. Electoral authorities distributed 416 voting machines to the 208 overseas polling stations. The largest number of polling stations will be reopened in Turkey and the United Kingdom, with more than 100 on each country. More than 4,000 members of the election commissions abroad, including almost 3,000 representatives of Bulgarian expatriates, will ensure that the election process runs smoothly and without any incidents. And the Italian Coast Guard rescued over 300 young men and boys, mostly from Egypt, in heavy storms as their fishing boat plundered off the coast of Calabria Saturday night. In an operation that finished at dawn Sunday morning, the Coast Guard rescue team made 3 trips out of the fishing boat, where they transferred groups of migrants to the rescue boat and brought them to port barefoot, drenched and shivering. The Calabrian coast has sent a surge of migrants' arrivals in the past few months, but the region is still not equipped like the ports in Sicily to handle big numbers. The migrants were transferred to a recently built shelter with a capacity to hold 120 people. So far this year, over 57,000 migrants have arrived in Italy by sea.
At 1 a.m., we were advised that about 300 migrants could be arriving, so the Red Cross, along with all the authorities that are responsible for handling the disembarkation on the pier. We activated and came down here to the pier. We prepare as well do all the time, not with all the protective gear. We welcomed the migrants, giving the face masks, blankets, and other things they needed, and were transferred then to our tent structure.
Now we address other topics. COP26 ends with Glasgow Pact, agreed after last-minute negotiations. The COP26 climate talks have agreed to get countries to strengthen their emissions cutting targets for 2030 by the end of the next year in a bid to limit dangerous warming. The Glasgow Pact was watered down at the last minute following a push by India and China, prompting angry responses from European and vulnerable countries. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres told young people, indigenous communities and women leaders, all those leading the Climate Action Army, that he knew many of them were disappointed. And also said that the approved texts from COP26 were a compromise that took important steps, but the collective political will was not enough to overcome some deep contradictions. And Nicaragua was elected to serve as Vice President of the United Nations Climate Change Conference, COP26, representing Latin America and the Caribbean regions. The country's Vice Minister of Environment and Natural Resources, Javier Gutierrez, was chosen unanimously for the position in recognition of the Central American nation's work in the fight against climate change and the national policies for the preservation of Mother Earth and the climate justice. In his role as Vice President of the Board, Gutierrez will support and oversee the fulfillment of the work program of the current presidency at the COP26 Climate Conference, as well as the presidency of COP27 that will be assumed by Egypt in 2022. Nicaragua was also re-elected to continue representing the region on the Standing Committee on Finance at the Conference of the Parties. In Guatemala, heavy flooding affects homes, crops and roads in several communities in the municipality of Chisec, Alto Verapaz. According to the authorities of the National Coordinator for Disaster Reduction, the floods have greatly affected the rural communities of Carolina, Chubub and Mucilba. They also informed that at the moment, the municipality officials are carrying out the pertinent evaluations to know the magnitude of the damages caused, and in the next few hours, they expect to provide details. These floods occur 1 year after the passage of Storm Ida and Iota in 2020, an event in which 61 people lost their lives and hundreds disappeared, an event for which economic damages of around $750 million were also registered. And we have come to the end of this news brief. But remember, you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also, if you feel so inclined, please join us on social media for all the latest news. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. For Telesur English, I'm Gladys Quesada. Thank you for watching.